Our gospel reading this morning comes from the Gospel of Luke, and it is part of Luke's long narrative having to do with Jesus' travels. Hear these words. After Jesus had finished all his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. A centurion there had a slave whom the centurion valued highly and who was ill and close to death. When the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders to him, asking him to come and heal his slave. When they came to Jesus, they appealed to him earnestly, saying, "The centurion is worthy of having you do this for him, for he loves our people, and he has built our synagogue for us." And Jesus went with them, but when he was not far away from the centurion's house, the centurion sent friends to say to Jesus, "Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. Therefore, I did not presume to come to you. But only speak the word and let my servant be healed. For I also am a man set under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, 'Go,' and he goes. And I say to another, 'Come,' and he comes. And to my slave, 'Do this,' and the slave does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at the centurion. And turning to the crowd that followed him, he said, "I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith." When those who had been sent returned to the centurion's house, they found the slave in good health. Please pray with me. Might words spoken and words heard and the spaces in between prompt us to look closely at what it means to lead. Amen. By most any definition, Gary McCullough is a leader, if you will, a captain of industry. He has an MBA from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern. He serves on a variety of corporate boards. He's been a member of senior management at Abbott Laboratories and the chewing gum icon Wrigley's. And he served as CEO and president of the Career Education Corporation. An impressive resume for an impressive guy. But as the old maxim puts it, great leaders are made, not born. And McCullough is no exception to that rule. And part of his formation as a leader came as a result of his time serving in the U.S. Army. While serving as an officer, McCullough was assigned to Fort Bragg as a platoon leader. It was February, and it had been raining all week long. But that didn't stop his platoon and others from engaging in field exercises in the great outdoors. And as they went through their soggy paces, the commanding general made his rounds to review the troops. The general approached one of the vehicle drivers, a lowly private in McCullough's platoon, and questioned him about how he felt about having to do these field exercises. "Sir," responded the private, "it stinks." Unfazed, the general asked him why he felt that way. "There are people," said the bold young man, "who think this is great weather for doing infantry operations. I personally think 75 and partly cloudy would be much better." The general thought for a moment, and then he said, "What can I do to make it better for you?" The private didn't hesitate. "Sir," he said, "I sure could use a Snickers bar." 2 days later, reports McCullough, a box arrived for the young private, and in it were 38 Snickers bars, exactly the number of folks in the platoon. And with it, a short note from the general. "I can't do anything about the weather," he wrote, "but I hope this makes your day brighter. Please share these with your buddies." On that day, says McCullough, on that day at that time, we would have followed that general anywhere. I never served in the military, so I can't comment based on firsthand experience. But I am sure that leadership issues are as hotly debated in military circles as they are anywhere else. Just what is it that makes for a good leader? What skills, what resources, what is needed to lead men and women under life-threatening conditions like battle and in mostly uncomfortable situations like field exercises on a cold and rainy winter's day? What does it take to be a leader in those circumstances? And further, are there things that we can learn and use, like McCullough, in our own lives as civilians? I think so. And I think our lesson from Luke provides us with another good example of leadership in action. So let's take a look at this story. The central character in this story is a centurion, a Roman army officer. Rome, you need to understand, had one of the most highly organized military organizations that the world has ever seen. The last I knew, they still were studying the Roman military at West Point. That's how well put together it was. It was made up of thousands and thousands of men organized into about 30 legions. Legions of roughly 6,000 legionnaires and officers each. Every legion was made up of approximately 60 centuries, and each century had 100 men. And the officer in the command of a century was called appropriately a centurion. We don't know the name of this particular centurion. We simply know he was assigned to lead the troops stationed in Capernaum. He was, it appears, a very fair man who respected the local people. This was not always or even usually the case. In fact, assignments to Palestine were considered difficult because the Jews of the first century were often in a state of unrest and at times even open rebellion against Rome. But this centurion had a different approach than many of his peers. Rather than lording it over the local folks, we're the occupiers, you're the occupied, rather than shaking Rome's fist under their noses, rather than simply relying on the superior strength and weaponry of his troops, he relied instead on understanding and respect. After all, he had gone so far as to build a synagogue for the residents of the town, evidence of which, by the way, still exists. Indeed, as one author notes, the basalt foundation that lies beneath the existing 3rd century synagogue is believed to be a remainder of the centurion's 1st century gift. The centurion's relationship with the people of Capernaum is apparently so good that some of the Jewish elders are willing to approach Jesus on his behalf when he requests healing for his slave. He loves our people, the elders tell Jesus. This is not what Jesus usually hears on the road. Not what he usually hears people say about the Roman soldiers. Indeed, it probably doesn't even match his own experience as a young man growing up in an occupied nation. So he decides to go and check things out for himself. But then, as he draws close to the centurion's house, some of the centurion's friends come up to Jesus with a message from the Roman officer. "Lord," the centurion says in his message, addressing Jesus, "Lord, don't trouble yourself by coming any further. I am not worthy to have you enter my home." Strange words, perhaps, except when one realizes that the centurion seems to have understood that as a practicing, observant Jew, which Jesus was, in that day, he should never have stepped into the house of a non-Jew, a Gentile. This is an enormously respectful action on the part of the Roman centurion. By all rights, he could have ordered that Jesus be dragged into his house, but he doesn't. And then, as the rest of his message is relayed by the elders, the centurion conveys something that simply amazes Jesus. He says in his message, "But only speak the word, and my servant will be healed. For I am also a man under authority. I say to my soldier, 'Go,' and he goes. I say to another, 'Come,' and he comes. I say to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." Or as Eugene Peterson translates, "Just give the order, and my servant will get well. For I am a man under orders. I also give orders. I understand. I know how it works," he says. "I know what it means to be a follower. And I know what it means to be a leader. Leaders lead and followers follow. And you, Jesus," remember, he has addressed him as Lord. "You, Jesus, are a leader, the leader. You are the one who gives orders." Jesus, we are told, is stunned. He can't believe this. Even among his own people, he has not seen such a demonstration of faith, such a demonstration of really understanding who he is. And right there, right then, in the middle of the road, he gives the order, and the slave is healed. So what is it that we can glean about leadership from this story of a Roman centurion? First, note that he is a man of love. I know, many people think that love is all about hearts and flowers and chocolates and mushy stuff. That there's no place in this man's army for such stuff as love. But I suspect, without having done any formal survey or poll, I suspect that anyone here today who is a veteran of the armed forces would tell you that aside from the relationships that they have with spouse and children if they had them, or perhaps with their parents, aside from those relationships, they have never experienced as strong a bond as they experienced with their fellow sailors, soldiers, Marines, or airmen. A bond so strong, so real, that they would be willing to give life itself protecting one another. They may never have thought about that as love. They may never have labeled it as love. But what else is love if it is not the willingness to put the needs and concerns of others ahead of our own? That, my friends, is what love truly is. It's not about hearts and flowers and mushiness. It's about the willingness to place other needs ahead of our own. The centurion was a good leader because he was willing to do just that. For the people of Capernaum, in spending his own resources to build them a synagogue, and especially in the relationship with his slave, you need to understand he had complete, total, absolute control over that slave. He could have done anything to that slave he wanted to, anything at all. It was all legal. But he took the risk, and a very real risk it would have been for someone in his position. He took the risk of appearing to be weak and vulnerable. That's love. A good leader, first and foremost, above everything else, must truly love the men and women and children he or she leads. Second, with love comes respect. Over and over and over again in this story, we see the many ways the Samaritan shows respect for others. He respects the Jewish elders. He respects the people of Capernaum. He respects the needs of his slave. He respects this Jewish rabbi named Jesus. His respect flows in all directions. He respects his superiors. He respects those he serves, and he respects those who serve at his command. A good leader must be a person of respect. Finally, a good leader must understand chain of command and his or her place in that chain. The centurion freely acknowledges that he is a man under orders himself. He freely acknowledges that Jesus has some sort of authority that is well beyond his own. And he understands that others, his slave and the soldiers, they derive their authority from him. A good leader must understand the source of his or her authority, as well as how he or she transmits authority to others. On this Veterans Day, as we honor those who have served under orders and who in many cases have given orders, we are reminded that good leaders, true leaders, are not those who pummel and push around those they lead. Rather, like Gary McCullough's commanding officer, like the Roman centurion, indeed like Jesus himself, good leaders are people who lead out of a place of love and respect for their followers. They are women and men who understand their role, their place in the overall scheme of things. They are people who know deep, deep down that every good leader is first and still a good follower as well. Amen.